Hello there, my name is Shinsuke Nonaka, and I work at Studio Ghibli. The documentary you're about to see explores the birth of a film and the birth of a studio. The film is Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind, and the studio is, you guessed it, Studio Ghibli. There'll be plenty of interviews, film clips, and recreations of actual events. Parts of this program first aired on Japanese television after the release of Princess Mononoke. We hope you'll have fun retracing the history of Studio Ghibli. The recreations use actors to portray people at Studio Ghibli. We've made sure they reproduce every quirk, including the body language of the people they're playing. Watch closely and you'll get a good idea of what it's like to spend time with Hayao Miyazaki and Toshio Suzuki.
Who's that guy with Hayao Miyazaki? Here he is again at a screening. And at an exhibition. On the street. At a party. In the studio. Wherever Miyazaki goes, he always seems to be there. Meet Toshio Suzuki, chief producer of Studio Ghibli. As Miyazaki says, finding a good producer is the best thing that can happen to a director. How did a reporter for one of Japan's muckraking weeklies team up with Hayao Miyazaki to become one of Japan's most successful producers? It all started with a phone call. In 1978, Toshio Suzuki was assigned to help start a new monthly devoted to animation. The magazine was called Animage. Suzuki was 29 years old. When he started, he didn't know the first thing about animation. 20 years later, he produced the first animated feature in Japan's history to gross more than 10 billion yen at the box office. How did he do it? For 6 years, Suzuki covered nothing but murders, mobsters, and celebrity scandals. When he discovered one day he was being transferred to a new animation magazine, it was like a bolt from the blue. An animation magazine? One of Suzuki's jobs at the new magazine was a monthly column on animated classics. His first choice was The Little Norse Prince Valiant, directed by Isao Takahata. The Little Norse Prince Valiant took an unflinching look at important social issues. It was the first Japanese animated film for young adults. Director Isao Takahata was 27. Hayao Miyazaki was only 22 and just starting out. Takahata recognized his talent and made him one of the key animators on Prince Valiant. Suzuki wanted a few comments from the director for his column, so he picked up the phone and called Takahata. By 1978, Takahata was already a giant in the world of animation. No one could have guessed that phone call would lead to one of the most successful collaborations in Japanese animation. This was the call that led to the birth of Studio Ghibli. To his astonishment, what Suzuki got from Takahata was a 1-hour explanation of why he couldn't give any comments on Prince Valiant. Then Takahata called someone else to the phone. This was Suzuki's first encounter with Hayao Miyazaki. Miyazaki was different. He said he'd comment on Prince Valiant, and he wanted 16 pages in Animage for his comments. In the end, Suzuki couldn't get a single comment out of either Takahata or Miyazaki.
To be honest, I wondered what was with these guys.
Suzuki never forgot that phone call, and the following year, he found himself covering a new animated feature directed by Miyazaki. The Castle of Cagliostro was Miyazaki's first film as a director. Over the years, Cagliostro has lost none of its impact and stands as a masterpiece of the art of animation. This was the film that prompted Suzuki to visit Miyazaki for the first time. Suzuki wanted to interview Miyazaki on his new feature, but Miyazaki almost completely ignored him. He wouldn't even pose for photos. All Suzuki could get was this one shot. The toy Miyazaki is holding is something he turns to for help when he runs into problems animating a scene. If he catches the ball, he bets the scene will go well. At first, he could only catch it 20% of the time. But with practice, he was able to catch it every time. He still reaches for it whenever he has problems animating a scene. The Castle of Cagliostro was not a box office hit. But Suzuki was amazed at the quality of the animation. He started running regular features on Miyazaki's work in the pages of his magazine. After their first meeting on Cagliostro, Suzuki was destined to spend most of his time working with Miyazaki. After they got to know each other better, Suzuki found himself discussing film concepts with Miyazaki. Miyazaki was overflowing with stories he dreamed of animating. Suzuki decided to help him realize some of the ideas he talked about so passionately. One of the stories that excited Miyazaki was the basic concept for Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind. Suzuki was convinced Nausicaa would make a great animated feature. Before he knew it, he was working hard to help Miyazaki realize the dream of bringing Nausicaa to the screen. Animated features were usually promoted through tie-ins with existing properties, such as comic books. So when Suzuki tried to pitch the idea of making Nausicaa, he was turned down flat. What's the point of a feature without a comic to support the promotion? If Suzuki had given up, Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind would never have seen the light of day. But Suzuki showed the determination that was soon to make him a successful producer. If they wouldn't let Miyazaki make Nausicaa without a comic book version first, then Miyazaki would make one for them. And so, in 1982, the comic book version of Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind made its debut in Animage. A year later, Nausicaa was the most popular feature in the magazine. A reader's poll put it among the top 5 titles ever serialized in Animage. The story was released in paperback and started to attract media attention. Nausicaa's popularity continued to build, and finally, Miyazaki got the green light to start working on a feature version. Miyazaki's passion and the passion Suzuki brought to realizing Miyazaki's vision had finally borne fruit. With Takahata producing and Miyazaki directing, work on Nausicaa attracted top animation talent from all over Japan. Suzuki did his part to raise awareness of Nausicaa through the pages of Animage. In late 1983, work on Nausicaa fell behind schedule due to Miyazaki's demanding standards. With Suzuki's support, Animage printed an urgent call for more animators to help on the feature.
Then one day he just showed up. Afterwards, I realized how much guts it must have taken to walk right in and hand Miyazaki samples of his work.
The brusque young man who came to see Miyazaki that day would soon rock the world of Japanese animation. He traveled to Tokyo after seeing the call for help in Animage. He knocked on Miyazaki's door, pulled out a storyboard he'd created, and shoved it into Miyazaki's hands. He's got talent. Miyazaki realized immediately the boy was a natural and made a daring decision. He assigned him to animate the giant warrior, a 1,000-year-old destroyer of civilization that figures in the climax of Nausicaa.
For Miyazaki, this is one of the key scenes in the movie, but animating something like this is a huge challenge. Sure, if you aren't looking to show people something they've never seen, anyone could animate this sequence, but Miyazaki wanted something with impact, very detailed, with a unique sense of movement. It's really a high point of the film.
And this is what audiences saw. The way the young man animated the giant warrior, the explosions, and the movement of tanks in Nausicaa amazed even Miyazaki. The young man's name was Hideaki Anno. Years later, in 1997, his animated feature Neon Genesis Evangelion appeared the same summer as Princess Mononoke. But in contrast to Anno's dark world view, the promotional copy for Princess Mononoke consisted of a single word: live. And so, Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind was finally completed. It was a story of environmental destruction told through Miyazaki's unique animation. Nausicaa was an immediate hit with nearly 1 million tickets sold. Long lines greeted the film on its opening day. Suzuki was amazed. All these people were here to see Nausicaa. This was the day he had worked for so long. Takahata, Miyazaki, and Suzuki decided to continue making animated features. To do this, they needed a studio to work from. Suzuki continued as editor of Animage, but his involvement in animated films took another big step. The Tokyo animation studio born out of this collaboration was named Studio Ghibli. The name Ghibli was carefully chosen by Miyazaki himself. But what does Ghibli mean?
Can you guess where the name Ghibli comes from? Ghibli is actually an Italian word for the hot winds that blow out of the Sahara Desert. The Italians gave this name to one of their World War II observation planes. Miyazaki is crazy about airplanes. He first encountered the name Ghibli as a type of aircraft. Later, he found out it also means hot wind. When he was looking for a name for his new studio, he remembered Ghibli. It symbolized the impact he wanted to make on the animation industry. But after he named the studio Ghibli, something unexpected happened.
Ghibli. It wasn't till later that someone noticed a problem.
You know, it's really supposed to be Ghibli. So how did it get to be Ghibli? Well, Miyazaki won't want to hear this, but the fact is, he made a mistake.
Ghibli.
Sure enough, it's Ghibli. We asked one of Miyazaki's animators, Alexandra Wyrock from Italy.
GHI is pronounced gi in Italian. Of course, in Japanese, it's quite clear. The only way to pronounce the spelling is Ghibli. But the original Italian is really pronounced Ghibli.
You know, Ghibli doesn't work somehow. It sounds like a rumbling stomach or something like that. I'm not sure we would have picked Ghibli to name the studio. Ghibli is a unique name. No one else in the world uses it.
Studio Ghibli's first release was Castle in the Sky. Miyazaki had dreamed of making an action-adventure film that would appeal to all ages. Castle in the Sky became an animation classic. Once again, Ghibli had scored at the box office. Its first releases were science fiction and adventure stories. Everyone wondered what Miyazaki would do next. Miyazaki's next feature made a trio of strange creatures famous throughout Japan. It also gave Suzuki a new challenge as producer. The name Miyazaki gave these strange creatures was Totoro. He'd been thinking about the story for 10 years. Once again, Suzuki was certain Miyazaki's concept would be a hit. He confidently gave a presentation to Ghibli's backers at Takuma. What they told him came as a shock. An animated film set in the post-war period about weird creatures? No one will want to see it. Suzuki's pitch was rejected. The post-war period still had a strong image of poverty and hardship. But Suzuki didn't give up. If they won't take one film, maybe they'll take two. So he pitched again, pairing My Neighbor Totoro and Grave of the Fireflies with Isao Takahata directing. Afterwards, he discovered that trying to make two films at once was a big mistake. But at the time, Suzuki was desperate to get the go-ahead for production. So he made his second pitch for an animated double bill.
This time they really got mad. We didn't want to make a film about monsters, so now you want to make a film about graves?
Suzuki can look back and laugh about it now, but at the time, things looked bleak. Then, out of nowhere, came a lucky break. The publisher of Grave of the Fireflies decided to back the project, and Suzuki finally got his green light. Ghibli began work on both films with support from two different publishing houses. But this meant Ghibli had to find the resources to produce 2 full-length features in parallel in only 2 years while setting new standards of quality. The whole idea was foolhardy. The 2 films competed for resources. There were 2 promotional campaigns to manage, 2 publishing houses to deal with. It was a nightmare. The studio was facing a crisis, but Suzuki refused to give in to the pressure. After 2 years of hell, 2 new features were born. Grave of the Fireflies told its story with more impact than a live-action film. It was the first work of animation to faithfully depict real life. Along with Totoro, it dominated Japan's film industry awards in 1988. Its appeal cut across all generations. Grave of the Fireflies was an instant classic. One day, Miyazaki sat in front of a train station to do some field work. He carefully observed the same thing all day long: the skirts of young women passing by. A whole day watching women's skirts move as they walked. What he saw that day was reflected in his next film. Here it is. Miyazaki's next film was a message for the young women of Japan. Kiki's delivery service follows a young girl as she learns the meaning of responsibility and struggles to overcome life's challenges. The film was an enormous hit with female audiences. Kiki's delivery service sold 4 times as many tickets as previous Ghibli films. It topped the box office for Japanese films in 1989. By now, Studio Ghibli's name was synonymous with high-quality animation and storytelling. But with the success of Kiki's delivery service, Miyazaki, Suzuki, and Studio Ghibli faced a turning point. The production approach used for Kiki had reached its limits and would have to be restructured if Ghibli was to continue. What kind of company would Ghibli become? Kiki's delivery service was unquestionably a success, but ironically, the film's quality created another problem for Ghibli. Japanese animators are paid a piecework rate by the cell or drawing, but production quality for Kiki's delivery service was so high, it took twice as long as normal to complete. As a result, the animators only made half as much as usual.
The animators' pay was far too low. We had almost twice as big a budget for Kiki as we did for Nausicaa. But Kiki required a lot more work. I think the average animator was only getting about 100,000 yen a month. No bonuses. That's, what, maybe $10,000 a year. It just wasn't going to work. We had to do something.
Pay wasn't the only problem. Ghibli itself was a production company, but animators were only hired feature by feature. This made it impossible to develop the younger animators.
To be honest, we thought it might be a good time to pack it in. The only other option was to start bringing animators on staff. That meant recruiting and training them.
Miyazaki set 2 goals for Studio Ghibli. One was to provide a good working environment for studio staff. The other was the development of young animators. The next step in Ghibli's evolution was also the next step in Suzuki's career. He became a full-time member of Studio Ghibli. Until then, he combined his work as producer with his job as managing editor of Animage. Ghibli hired many young animators for its next feature. Only Yesterday tells the story of a young woman facing a crossroads in her life. The animation had to convincingly depict people, their movements, and emotions. For the first time, Suzuki was credited as producer. Using experience acquired in the publishing industry, Suzuki helped Takahata create the #1 Japanese film of the year. And thanks to the revenues from Only Yesterday, Miyazaki was able to meet both of his goals for Studio Ghibli. Studio Ghibli's second film under the new production strategy was released the following summer. Porco Rosso embodied Miyazaki's ideal of what it means to be cool. Porco Rosso is the story of fun-loving, free-living seaplane pilots in the Adriatic. Miyazaki poured all his interest in planes, flying, and adventure into Ghibli's new film, and audiences responded. Porco Rosso led the theatrical box office in Japan in 1992. About the same time Miyazaki was opening the wrap party for Porco Rosso, Studio Ghibli's new home in the western suburbs of Tokyo was also completed. The buildings were set among trees and surrounded by nature, just the kind of environment Miyazaki likes. At Studio Ghibli, the women's washrooms are much nicer than the men's. We wondered why.
Miyazaki is a feminist, actually. He also has this conviction that to be successful, companies have to make it possible for their female employees to succeed too. You can see this attitude in Princess Mononoke. All the characters working the bellows in the ironworks are women. Then there's Porco Rosso. Porco's plane is rebuilt entirely by women.
Studio Ghibli's building is another Miyazaki creation. 4 years after Miyazaki established a policy of nurturing young talent, his strategy bore fruit. Ghibli's first animated television special created by the new generation of animators. The Ocean Waves traces the relationship of 3 friends from high school through college. It proved that the generation of animators first hired to work on Only Yesterday were coming of age. Ghibli had laid the foundation for future success. Their next hit was the story of what happens when a group of raccoons fight to keep their forest out of the hands of developers. Pom Poko was a bittersweet comedy that captivated audiences and, once again, topped the box office for Japanese films. Ghibli's next film introduced a new director, Yoshifumi Kondo. Kondo was a senior animator who had worked with Miyazaki and Takahata for years. In Whisper of the Heart, Kondo portrayed the struggles of a young girl in search of her true self and extended Ghibli's box office leadership among Japanese films for yet another year. In the autumn of 1995, following the release of Whisper of the Heart, Ghibli began work on a long-awaited new film directed by Miyazaki, Princess Mononoke. In the beginning, Miyazaki was working on 2 completely different stories, Princess Mononoke and Boro the Caterpillar. Boro the Caterpillar tells the story of big adventures in the tiny world of an insect as he makes an epic journey from his home in a tree to the next tree along the street. Miyazaki told Suzuki, "I want to show that even a tiny caterpillar has its own complete world, its own life." Miyazaki couldn't decide which story to do first, Princess Mononoke or Boro. He was so torn between the two stories, he told Suzuki he was going to make them both. As producer, Suzuki took a long, objective look at Miyazaki's and Studio Ghibli's capabilities and the current environment for film production. Then he gave Miyazaki his recommendation.
I convinced him to concentrate on Princess Mononoke. It's an action film, right? Once you're past a certain age, it's hard to do action stories. Miyazaki was about 54 then. I thought this might be his last chance to do a story like Mononoke. If he did Boro first, he might never make Mononoke, so the timing seemed right. There was another reason. The young animators who joined us to work on Only Yesterday were approaching 30 and in their prime. It seemed to me Princess Mononoke would be the best vehicle to showcase their abilities. Then there was financing. Action stories take a lot of money to produce and promote. The timing seemed right for that too, because Ghibli was in a good position to get financing.
The stage was set. The actors were ready. And 2 years later, Princess Mononoke was born and changed the world of animation forever.
As I mentioned, parts of this program first aired on Japanese television in 1998, so it doesn't cover Ghibli's films after Princess Mononoke. Ghibli released My Neighbors the Yamadas in 1999, Spirited Away in 2001, and The Cat Returns and The Ghibli's Episode 2 in 2002. In 2001, the Ghibli Museum opened in Tokyo. And in 2004, Miyazaki plans to release his next film, Howl's Moving Castle. Before we say goodbye, I wonder if you've seen the character named Nonaka in Ghibli's. I'm actually the model for this character. I personally don't see the resemblance, but maybe you do. Thanks for watching.